Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I as a consumer are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Hello, welcome to this edition of For the Record. We welcome back today State Representative Mike Hanna. Representative Hanna, welcome to For the Record. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
June is a very busy time of year in Harrisburg, and we are right in the middle of the budget. Where, as we sit here today on the first day of summer, where do things stand with the budget?
Well, we have literally 7 legislative days left to the June 30th deadline, and I can tell you quite confidently that we'll have a budget on time. The separation between what the budget needs to be and where it is probably only about $90 or $100 million, and that's a lot of money.
Sure.
But in terms of a $28.3 billion budget, it's not a gap that is difficult to close.
Now, is that number in close to where the governor put out in his February proposal? You're in about that number?
Very close, yeah. I'm not sure if he was at 28.3 or if the House Republicans were the first ones to settle at 28.3, but that seems to be real close to the number that everybody's agreed on. And the governor might have been a little higher or a little lower back in February, but right now I think they're going to be pretty close to that number. Now,
today's not a session day. Yesterday it was a Thursday. Both the House and Senate were in yesterday. Do you have a schedule for next week as well, or is it just Monday we report and then we're there till we're done?
It's both. It's Monday we're there till we're done, but they have scheduled the session days to include Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So technically under our rules we should adjourn by Sunday night at 11. But we do have the ability to suspend for 1 hour. We can't go past that midnight time, but we could extend from 11 p.m. to midnight if we needed to on June 30th, but we will be done before July 1st.
Now, with the rules that are in place now in the House, does the budget have to be presented 3 days before you can vote on it? Yes. And has it been presented yet? The House has had a 3-day calendar already, and we debated it. We attempted to amend it. In fact, there may have been 1 or 2 small amendments to the budget. That was all done a week ago. So those 3 calendar days are complete, passed, sent to the Senate, and now the Senate has completed their 3 calendar days this week. However, they haven't called it up on third and final passage, and that's because the discussions are still going as much on the floor as off the floor to try and get to a final agreed upon budget that they can then amend on the Senate floor and send back to us on concurrence. When it comes back on concurrence, we're not required to have it on the calendar for 3 days. We can deal with it within, I think it's 24 hours. But it's not a 3-day waiting period. Now, the budget itself, will that include some of the things that the governor's talked about, privatizing the liquor stores and also transportation? Are they going to be separate? They're going to be separate, those two in particular. What is included that you've heard a lot of discussion about is there will be some resolution of the Medicaid expansion. There'll be some resolution of the pension issue. Those things are likely to be addressed. There could be some privatization, not of the liquor stores as much, but of whether there's any privatization of anything else. That could be there. Transportation would be a separate bill altogether. Well, let's start with Medicaid. That's one of the things that's a discussion now. It came out of the Senate yesterday. They're looking at it sort of a hybrid, not jumping into the expansion of Medicaid completely with some parameters there. Has that reached the House, and is there any chance of that being, it's more of a, on the Senate side, it's more of a Democrat and Republicans sort of working together. The House is much more split, isn't it? It would, yes. It'd be fair to say that on the Senate side there has been some bipartisan work on Medicaid expansion in particular. And you know, what they've amended into their proposal is to essentially say, well, we're not just going to accept the Affordable Care Act, because we think there have to be some restrictions, one of which I saw I would totally agree with, and that is that you can't force children out of our CHIP program, which is a pretty good insurance program that Pennsylvania offers. You can't force them out of that program and onto Medicaid simply because we've expanded Medicaid. So, you know, the Senate's putting some parameters on the acceptance of the Medicaid expansion. Our discussions with the House Republican leaders were pretty much, you know, we're with the governor on this, we'll let him decide.
But the House Democrats pretty much agree with the Senate, both the R's and the D's in the Senate, that this is something that we ought to be trying to do. I recognize that even though if we could implement it fully by the time that it's ready to go on the federal level, it could mean as much as $3.84 billion. I recognize that that's not possible at this late date because it'll take us a while to ramp up and get, as soon as it's approved, to get it to ramp up and get everything fully implemented. But it still means real money, and most importantly, it means between 400 and 500,000 Pennsylvanians who currently do not have insurance would be covered by Medicaid, and that's the really important thing that we could do if we expand it.
Is it possible to take, with the CHIP program being such a good program here in the Commonwealth, is it possible to sort of take an adult CHIP program or expand that in some way so that Medicaid doesn't have to factor into it? Is that one of the discussions?
Probably the best thing to do there would be to return to our adult basic program. We had an adult basic program which was kind of CHIP for working people who didn't get insurance from their employer or couldn't afford insurance. So the adult basic program was pretty successful. Unfortunately, when Governor Corbett came in, that was one of the first things that he cut, and the adult basic program has largely gone away. If we return to that, and that takes Pennsylvania funding, then sure, there would be potential that there would be fewer people put on the Medicaid expansion if we return to the adult basic.
With Medicaid expansion, that's reimbursement at what level for how long from the federal government? It's 100 for the first few years, correct?
First 3 years, 100%, and then after that, it's at 90%. And the reality, and this is one of the concerns that's been raised by Governor Corbett, is that the feds have never been 100% on their pledges, if you will.
Right.
Well, this one's a little different. The Affordable Care Act, and I know everybody calls it Obamacare, so to make it easy, let's call it Obamacare. It's law, and it does, in law, say 100% and then 90%. Can't go below 90%. So the reality is the feds can't welsh on that without changing the law. So the reality is that if we opted into it, there would have to be a change in the law. That means Congress would have to vote to change the law and say we're not going to reimburse you at the 90% rate 6 or 7 years from now. That's not going to happen. Sure. I mean, you have 30-some states that are opting into this. There's no way that our congressman or any congressman is going to want to come back home and say, "Oh, by the way, we baited you into this, and now we're going to cut the funds."
Right. That's a good spot to stop. When we come back, more with State Representative Mike Hanna on For the Record. You're watching WHVL. And welcome back to For the Record. Our guest is State Representative Mike Hanna. Representative Hanna, when you were here last year, we talked about transportation and the studies that were done by the Corbett administration talking about find ways to fund transportation. Now both the House and the Senate have plans in place. One is much different than the other. Will that be part of the June 30th deadline, or do you think that is going to go into the fall? And let's talk about each one, and let's take some time and talk about transportation.
At this point, no one's given up on it. So, you know, it's still possible that we can reconcile where the House is, where the Senate is, and where the governor is on these issues. But it's reached a critical point. As we talked earlier, 7 legislative days left, and to have wildly different proposals makes it really difficult to bring them together.
And the difference is about $700 million. Is that about the number? The House is about 1.8 and the Senate's about 2.5?
That's right.
And there's a lot of different caveats there for the Senate with some of the things. One of the things, scariest thing for any driver in Pennsylvania, not just the cost for renewing licenses or anything like that. It's the $100 extra fine for moving violations.
Yeah, the $100 surcharge. Now that's out of the House version, but the $100 surcharge was designed to try and raise additional dollars, particularly for mass transit. They were going to funnel that directly to mass transit. But the House version that Representative Dick Hess, the majority transportation chairman, has worked on with the majority leader does not have that in there. But they do have some of the other fees and of course the uncapping of the oil franchise tax, which is the real big money raiser. That's what would raise the additional dollars. Now, it depends on how much it's the tax on the wholesale price of gasoline. So it depends on how much the oil companies pass it on. But in the first year, it could mean an 8-cent increase in your gas tax at the pump. By the end of the third year, it could be as much as 22 cents or 24 cents, depending on how much is passed on. So it has a significant impact on all of us who are using fossil fuels.
Right, the more you drive. And to be fair, the last time this was raised was during Governor Ridge's administration, so it's been a while since they've raised the price of gas. And realistically, you drive, and let's face it, Lock Haven to Harrisburg, that's a long drive. How much road? That's all state roads you're driving on the entire way. I mean, the Commonwealth has a huge amount of roads that they're responsible for.
And several studies have come out that have shown that you and I and the average Pennsylvania motorist is paying somewhere, depending on how much you travel, somewhere between $380 and $1,300, I believe, dollars a year in additional motoring costs, including gas while we're sitting in traffic. Today, driving up here for this show, right where the Interstate 80 and I-99 come together there near the Bellefonte interchange, that has become such a busy intersection, and I found myself sitting on the ramp behind probably 6 trucks. And of course, I was sitting there for some time. And that's the type of, when they did this calculation, that's the type of cost that they put in there. The additional cost of sitting in traffic, the additional cost of hitting potholes, and what it does to your vehicle.
Tires are expensive,
yes. So all of those costs were factored in, and they said that each Pennsylvania motorist is probably paying somewhere between $380 and $1,300 in additional costs each year, just because of the condition of our roads and bridges. And we are at a point now where if we don't do something soon, there's going to be an awful lot of bridges closed.
Now, also, that's for repair and maintenance. That's not any new addition, so there's no chance, like with the I-99 Interstate 80 interchange, that's not for new roads at all. This is for maintaining what we have now.
Well, actually, it depends on where your project falls. You're correct about the I-99 Interstate 80 interchange. That is such a huge cost that all that can be done there is the widening of the berm to try and allow for, particularly for Bryce Jordan Center events and football events.
Right.
When you have traffic coming from the east and they want to get off on that ramp, there's times when traffic's backed up on I-80. That's terribly unsafe. We'd like to fix that, but the price tag of putting a high-speed interchange in there is somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So the likelihood is that all we'll be able to afford with this project, or with this transportation bill, is widen the berms, have a longer turning lane so that we can protect the traffic so they're not sitting on Interstate 80 and stop traffic waiting to get out at that ramp. Those types of things can happen, but big projects can happen, and one of the big projects that is likely to happen if we can get this bill passed is the improvements from Boalsburg to Seven Mountains.
The missing link of 322.
Yes, that could be done. That's a big project, big dollar project, but a project that's definitely needed for Center County.
In either bill, House or Senate version, is there anything for 3P public-private partnerships to expand roads in that way?
There is an expectation that we'll be able to, the 3P bill passed independently earlier in the session, or maybe even in past session, I forget whether it was this year or last year, but that's law. And there is an expectation in this bill to capitalize on that and to try and develop more privatized roads. And whether that'll happen remains to be seen. But there's a heightened interest in that, and it may be the future of transportation. We don't know.
It's worked in a lot of other areas. Commonwealth of Virginia, also Indiana, part of their toll road is actually a public-private partnership. And I believe the way it's set up, the Commonwealth would structure the loan in any way to benefit them, but they get the road built and then eventually they take ownership of it. Right. It's not one of those things where people were always hesitant when the discussion was made by Governor Rendell about leasing the turnpike, about a different entity coming in and taking it over. Well, you can't move the road. It's got to be there for some finance. Another big thing going on in Harrisburg is pension reform. And out of the finance in the Senate talked about switching to 401k style rather than defined benefits. Talk a little bit about that if you can. Where things are in the House on that.
Well, actually what the Senate moved was only part one of what the governor had as a 3-part program. And the problem with what the Senate moved is it doesn't do anything to have any budgetary relief. The immediate problem that we're dealing with would actually be worse with the Senate bill because we would have to have a 2-tier system. And as a result, the projected costs are somewhere from around 22 to 32 billion. I'm sorry, I'm from Lock Haven. It's hard for me to say billion.
It's a big number.
It's a big number. But yeah, and we don't want to do legislation that creates more pension liability. We want to do things that reduce the pension liability. So what I'd like to see us do is go back and look at Act 120 of 2010. We did a whole bunch of things there, like increasing the retirement age from 60 to 65, increasing the vesting time from 5 years to 10 years, reducing the multiplier so that instead of getting 2.5% for every year of service, you get 2% for every year of service. All those things have an immediate savings for us, and that's what the type of thing we need to look at. We don't need to be looking at setting up a two-tier system that ends up costing us money in the long term. Because, you know, someone who's vested today and only has 10 years in, and that's the vesting time now, right, but they have a working lifetime of at least 25 more years, and then they have a retirement lifetime of probably 30 or more years.
Exactly.
So we have to maintain this defined benefit program for the next 60 years, and at the very least. And if we're going to have to maintain it without new money coming into it, because everybody's now paying into a defined contribution program, it becomes all of us, our liability, the taxpayer's liability, and it increases the cost. I don't want to see us go that direction. I want to make sure that we reduce the pension liability, unfunded liability.
That's a good stopping point. Back with more For the Record. Representative Mike Hanna is our guest after this. And welcome back to For the Record. Our guest is State Representative Mike Hanna. Representative Hanna, privatization has been one of the key things that Governor Corbett wanted to get accomplished this year. He started with the idea of privatizing the management of the lottery. A lot of people thought it was just privatizing the lottery, and a lot of people had issues with that. And in fact, Attorney General Kane took it to court, and it's been deemed unconstitutional the way it was done. Do you think there's going to be any movement with privatizing the management of the lottery from here on out?
The governor hasn't given up on that. He has until the end of the month. Now, it's not a legislative deadline. This is actually his deadline, okay, to rewrite the contract. And that's what he was talking about doing. I think that creates some problems because certainly is a suggestion that legally, if he rewrites the contract proposal to meet the Attorney General's objections, that he then has to rebid it.
Right, I would think so,
yeah.
yes.
So that may be the process that he has to go. But I would not say that he's given up by any stretch on this. He continues to hold out the possibility that they may be able to work out their differences with the Attorney General. Not really a legislative decision.
Now, and why wasn't that part of the legislature? Why did he do that more as an executive idea?
Well, once we establish a law, then he has the obligation to execute it.
Okay.
So there isn't anything in the lottery law that says that it has to be operated by state employees. So he certainly has the ability to look at management and decide how he's going to operate it, and that's why it doesn't have to come back to the legislature for review. And you know, in our division of responsibility in government, I mean, right, legislators are supposed to create the law. We're not supposed to be the ones implementing the law. That's the governor's domain, and I respect that. He has the obligation to run the day-to-day operations of all of our agencies, including the lottery program.
And now let's talk about liquor. The House has its own idea. Senator McElhaney has come out with his idea. The governor has stated, almost said, he sort of put it out to you guys that he wants this done by June 30th. That's why I'm wondering if you're going to have a budget on time or not. Where do you see privatization or modernization, as some people have talked about, where do you see liquor going from here in the Commonwealth?
Well, as you said, there's two different proposals out there, and they are significantly different. And one of the things that's, I mean, the House proved that they could do it. The House Republicans, the majority party, did a bill that they felt comfortable with. I voted against it, but they felt strongly that they could do it. The Senate, on the other hand, hasn't proven that they can pass anything. And they've got it out, or they don't even have it out of committee yet. They have it before the committee. Their proposal is much softer than what the House Republicans put out, probably less appealing to the governor. So we have to see where they end up on this. But as it stands right now, the fact that they're having difficulty getting it out of committee argues that if it's significantly different than the House and they can't get it out of committee, I'm not sure they can get it done in the next 7 days.
One of the things I've noticed in listening to various radio stations, a lot of appeals for not passing anything in terms of privatization, talking about how people are worried that if we have private liquor stores, the laws will be, people won't ID nearly as much is what they're inferring. Have you got a lot of push from people in those, what's the interest been about opinion?
You know, the public interest has been more for modernization. People are concerned about packaging reform. They're concerned about direct shipment of wine. Folks would like to buy wine directly from a winery. They find a brand of wine they like and they'd like to get it from there. They can't do that in Pennsylvania. They'd like stores, more stores that are located like at a Wegmans or at a grocery store or in a shopping mall.
Right.
Stores that are convenient and have convenient hours.
Yes.
And those things don't exist under current law. So all those modernization things, packaging reform, all of that is what the public talks to me about. They really don't care who's behind the register collecting for what's being sold. They don't care whether it's a private individual or whether it's a government individual. They just would like to see convenience and packaging reform and all of those types of things. So modernization has a real shot in this state. I mean, it could pass easily in the House and the Senate. Problem is, I don't think the governor's willing to accept that as complete privatization or complete movement on the liquor issue. And
Gut instinct right now, does anything pass from liquor by the end of this fiscal year?
no.
Okay.
Yeah, and modernization is the only thing I think that has a shot in the end of this in the next 7 days.
Our studio is about 1.5 miles away from an expanding prison area here. You represent all of that. What types of things are you sort of, what is that for your district? What types of things does that have to add to your
the
responsibility, I guess?
Yeah, the Benner, SCI Benner has had a significant impact. I mean, we've had the benefits as well as some of the burdens of having Rockview for years. And of course, we've worked our way through that. One time they had way too much land. Now they're much more defined in what they have and what they use. The addition of Benner has, I think, so far worked fairly well. My office has seen a significant impact in trying to refer folks to the appropriate process for hiring, and that's worked okay. Big change when they closed the prisons in Crescent and so on, because that meant there was a significant number of employees who were displaced and should have first option to come to Benner. We always knew that they weren't going to open with more than a third or with less than a third of the employees being skilled, prison experienced employees.
We need to wrap things up here. Larry Sabato has the governor's race leaning Democratic next year. Real quick, do you have a pick for next year yet? Or do you see Governor Corbett being beaten? Real quick, yes or no? And anybody?
Scott Conklin.
Okay, thanks for being here. You've been watching Further into WHVL. Thank you. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.